Jeff. It is surreal to be on this stage and with all of you. Thank you. As Jeff said, I'm a student at the University of Florida, but I'm also an alumna of the Alexander Muss High School in Israel. So where are my Muss people at? I spent my sophomore year in high school abroad studying at Muss, and I know you've heard it a few times or a million times at this conference, but the experience truly changed my life. I mean, I could talk about it for hours. I remember entering my Jewish studies class for the first time in Hod HaSharon. I had no idea that my teacher, Donnie, would become one of the most inspiring mentors and that my classmates would soon feel like my family. Muss is the catalyst that ignited my interest in pursuing a career in Jewish leadership. My experience there not only provided me with the most incredible community of best friends and mentors, but also allowed me to connect with Israel and my Jewish identity on a level that I had truly never experienced before. Muss is the reason that I defend my people and my homeland with immense confidence and pride. But enough about me and Muss. It is a profound honor to welcome to the stage a hero to many in this room, Douglas Murray. Douglas, welcome. Before we dive in, I just need to ask you, how are you, and how is it being here among so many admirers and supporters?
Well, first of all, good morning. It's wonderful to be with you all, wonderful to be with you, Phoebe, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's a wonderful opportunity, among other things, I think, for us to have not just a look back, but a look forward, because so many remarkable things have happened in recent days and weeks, and there's a lot of good we can do.
Yeah. So I recently read your article, The War Israel Won and the One the West is Losing, in which, if I may summarize your position for the crowd, Israel has won the war that it has been fighting over the last 2 years, but the West collectively continues to lose. Can you unpack how both of those things can be true at the same time and what the West must do moving forward in order to succeed?
Well, yes. I mean, the point I made in that article in the Free Press was that if you just look at the military situation in the Middle East, imagine going back to the perverted mind of Yahya Sinwar on October the 6th, 2023. Now, obviously, Sinwar was a psychopath, so he didn't think like normal people, but imagine if he had known that within 2 years of the atrocity that he started, Hamas would be decimated in Gaza, that he and every one of his top lieutenants would be dead, that Hezbollah, Hezbollah, the entity that the Iranian revolutionary government thought of as their kind of Lamborghini in the region, you know, their absolute prized possession, would be destroyed in wave after wave of the most targeted attacks in military history. That the Houthis in Yemen would be struck time and again, and that in the final indignity for him and those who support him, the Israeli Air Force and then the US Air Force would be able to fly over the skies of Iran with total impunity and bomb the Iranian nuclear reactors. To bomb the nuclear reactors that Prime Minister Netanyahu and so many other political leaders in Israel and outside of Israel have warned for a generation would be the generation's main existential threat. All of this came as a result of the atrocities that Sinwar and his friends started on the 7th of October. And every single one of these things followed. Now, the issue of at home, well, that's a very tricky one. Why, when Yahya Sinwar is killed, are there students at Princeton in the main quad chanting glory to our martyrs? What is our doing there? What is our doing there? These are not America's martyrs. They're not any Princeton I know's martyrs. What is it that should have happened that we would have come to expect that on the anniversaries of October the 7th and the 2 years there have been anniversaries, they would be dominated by news not of large demonstrations across American and Canadian and British and French and other cities against the rapists and killers and kidnappers of Hamas, but in support of them. There are many things to say about this, but perhaps I can put it in brief. This is like one of those internet memes, which direction, Western man? You know, you're at a point where there are two paths. One of the paths that some people in the West, let's not depress ourselves, they're a minority, but like a lot of very fanatical minorities, they're very noisy. They have decided that they will go through the path that admires the death cults, that admires the rapists and the murderers and the kidnappers, that believes that these people speak to them and that they're the voice of justice and indeed social justice around the world, including in America. I always say, among other things, these people are obviously slow learners because they might notice that all of the people they admire are now dead, but the real question is, what is the other path? What is the path which people could, and in my view, should be going down? And that, among other things, and this is why, tragically for Israel, but nevertheless, this is the burden, Israel is at the forefront of this civilizational issue. The other path is that young people and old, but mainly young people, have to work out whether there isn't another path, and that the other path should be not denigrating, for instance, the remarkable young men and women of the IDF, but emulating them. Imagine if we in America and in the West managed to create a generation like the generation that Israel produced from the morning of the 7th of October. Imagine if our societies were based not on grievance culture and victim Olympics and all that sort of thing, but on heroism and love of country and love of culture and knowing what you want to defend and defending it.
So you brought up college campuses, and as a college student, I've seen anti-Semitism play out firsthand. You stand by the statement, what starts with the Jews never ends with them, and in the wake of October 7th, we've seen this unfold rapidly on our streets and campuses. For those that feel that this isn't their fight, how do you explain that the forces that fuel anti-Semitism are the same ones that will eventually turn against their own freedoms and values?
Well, I quite often look for what you might call hacks in an argument. What's the fastest way to get somebody to understand your position? And one way I've found in the last couple of years when I've been outside of Israel, in America, Britain, Canada, Australia, and so on, is every Western country I go to, I say, let me try the following test on you. If there is a pro-Israel demonstration, which of course there have been in all these countries, Jews and non-Jews, you will notice something. You will notice that they are dominated by people flying the flag of the State of Israel and the flag of the country they're in. So a pro-Israel protest in New York will have people flying the American flag and the Israeli flag. I was in Canada about a year into the war, and I was speaking, I think, in Toronto, and we not only were there Canadian flags, it was a meeting of Christians for Israel, Jewish people for Israel, and others. There were flying of Canadian flags and of Israeli flags, and at the end of the evening, we sang Hatikva, and we sang O Canada, and I had to pretend to know the words. But here's the point. If it's an anti-Israel protest in any of these countries, you may see the Palestinian flag, you may see the Hamas flag or the Hezbollah flag or the flag of the Iranian Revolutionary Government, or you might see one of these deluded people with, like, you know, the obvious, the joke's too easy, but you can fill it in yourself, the kind of trans for Gaza types. You might see people flying all of these flags. What you will never see them do is flying the flag of the country they're in. Never. In fact, if there is an American flag at an anti-Israel protest in America, it is only there in order to be burned. Okay, fastest way I can do it. That's the fastest way I can do it. That is the pattern, and it holds 100% of the time. In London, when there is an anti-Israel march, it wouldn't occur to the marchers to finish with the singing of God Save the King. Wouldn't occur to them. Of course they wouldn't. Why would they? They hate Israel, but they hate the country they're in as well. That's what the West has to wake up to.
So you make such insightful comments, but I think most of us are curious on how you actually came to this position. I mean, we know you as one of the most steadfast and eloquent non-Jewish defenders of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. We know what you believe, but I think the deeper question for many of us is why. Can you walk us through the journey that led you to realize that this isn't just a Jewish issue, but rather one that impacts all of Western civilization?
I can, reluctantly, I have to say, because like most people from England, I don't like talking about myself and find it vaguely embarrassing, like taking your clothes off in public, you know. But I mean, I have been asked that, or versions of that question, quite a lot in recent years. And I suppose I'd just say, first of all, there's something sad about the need to ask the question. By which I mean, when Jewish friends and Israeli friends and others say, but I don't understand, like, how come you're on our side? I say, who wouldn't be? Who wouldn't be? And I think that's a much healthier way to think of it. You know, why would you like us? Is the sort of undertone of it. I've never found it difficult. I mean, in a fight between a democracy and a death cult, between a society that loves life and a society that worships death, I don't find it hard to choose. And you know, of course, it's clear that a lot of people in our time do. I think that's sometimes because they're profoundly wicked people, and often because they're profoundly ill-educated, which we could probably come to. Literally, just one of the things I've particularly realized in recent years is a lot of people who are supportive of Israel think that we can come up with the perfect argument that, as it were, will make the other side understand our position, you know. And I meet a lot of brilliant, you know, people in the very fortunate life I have, and very often they'll say, there's this document that shows this, and in 1964, and what the other side don't realize is that in 1973, and I say, you know, most of the other side don't know what you're talking about. They don't know what you're talking about. You can mention the Oslo process, they don't know where Oslo is. They've never heard of it. What's this process he talks about? They've got their very strange thing. All I would say about myself is I've never found it difficult. I was brought up by good parents, very fortunate, and they taught me right from wrong. And I grew up in a, you know, Anglican Christian household, and I suppose I found an intellectual way to the positions that I hold, and I can explain some of that, but in a way it doesn't quite explain it, because sometimes an issue can be of the brain, and that's it, but also sometimes an issue becomes an issue of the heart. And for me, for many years, the cause of the Israeli nation and also of the Jewish people has been one that has been close to my heart. And, I mentioned to somebody earlier, but when I first went to Israel some quarter of a century or so ago now, I'd be asked by those charming people in El Al's security checkpoints, why would you laugh at that? I would be asked by those charmers, why you come to Israel? You know anyone here? You're Jewish? No, not Jewish. You have friends in Israel? By the way, I've got to tell you one of my favorite ones I mentioned earlier. I once opened a skateboarding park for the JNF in the town of Sderot about 15 years ago. Some of you will know. And I have no expertise in the opening of skateboarding parks. I don't know why it fell to me, but it was my honor, and we spent a wonderful day with the families there. And I remember they gave me one of these, what they called rockets into roses. You probably all know about this by now. But it was one of the first ones of this. It was a large thing that had my name on the base, and it's a Katusha rocket that had been fashioned into a rose like this. I get to El Al security at the end of my trip. I used to say this was not a common gift at the time. I get there, they say, anyone give you anything while you're in Israel? I said, what is this? Every single El Al security person ended up gathering around the bag. What is this? They scanned it, they swabbed it, and eventually this big guy, he goes, okay, Douglas, apart from Katusha rocket, anyone give you anything in Israel? But I mention this only to say that by now, traveling there for many years and spending much of the last 2 years there, whenever I get to El Al security, they say, do you have family in Israel? I say, tons of them.
So you briefly mentioned that a lot of people are very uninformed. They don't really know what they're talking about. And I will tell you, speaking for my generation, that is unfortunately a huge issue. So we can talk about education in a little bit. But I wanted to talk about your book, The War in the West, because I actually read it, and I think that everybody in my school and my generation should have a copy of that book and should read it. It is so beyond important. In the book, you diagnose a civilization turning on itself, and I can tell you as a young individual that this is most apparent on college campuses where students chant slogans for movements that would eradicate the very freedoms that they enjoy. Yeah. This doesn't feel like just youthful defiance, but rather more so like an ideological trap.
Yes.
I'm curious about your thoughts. How did we get here? And what can we do to save our educational institutions and the next generation of minds that they shape?
It's a very profound question. About a year ago or so, I was going through some notebooks of mine, and I found one that I had been keeping during the time I'd written The War on the West. And I had the good fortune until his death to have lunch or dinner about twice a year with Henry Kissinger. And I found my notes from a lunch where this, and I'd been discussing the War on the West with him. And I noted in my notes afterwards that Dr. Kissinger said to me, it's not clear to me that a country that hates its past has any future. This is a very, very important point. It was one of the things I was trying to bring out in that book. All peoples around the world, all faiths, all religions, all nations, would ordinarily have a desire to feel pride in themselves. And we all understand this because if we bump into somebody from another country, you know, it's rather like politicians in America. A politician in America will say, which state are you from, to somebody, a member of the public, and they'll say, you know, I'm from Ohio, and they go, that's a terrific state. Yeah, okay, whatever, and it is, by the way. But my point is, at no point would any politician say, yeah, that one's okay, or whichever state the person mentions, say, I don't like that one. And it's the same with nations. Just as a matter of common courtesy, we all know that if you meet somebody from another country, you say, oh, wow, that's amazing. Great place. Why do we do that? Because we know, among other things, that it is the normal state of humankind to want to be proud of where they're from and for the good things in their culture. And that applies in every culture. It would be an extremely rude, discourteous person, among other things, who said, I don't think your country's up to any good. So that's normal. That was until very recently normal. Now, what has gone wrong in our society is a question I ask, that we venerate everything that is from elsewhere and are taught to loathe everything that is ours. Now, this is what a late philosopher friend of mine, Roger Scruton, called the culture of self-abnegation. The culture in which you are taught that what is yours you must disown. You must drop. As you know, at the beginning of the war in the West, I reflected on the fact that when I first moved to New York, shortly afterwards, the New York council chamber voted to remove the statue of Thomas Jefferson that had been there since the 1830s. Why? Because, as one council member who voted to remove the statue said, Thomas Jefferson doesn't represent our values. Well, as a great Jefferson scholar said to me when we were talking about this afterwards, Thomas Jefferson created our values. You think religious freedom drops from the heavens like rain? You think that the concept of religious liberty is normal in human societies? Now, this is the challenge we have to answer here. It's not the case, also, that we need to fake it. We have such a rich tradition in the West, thanks to our inheritance from the Torah, from great Jewish scholars and writers, from great Christian writers, from great writers in the ancient Greek and ancient Roman worlds. It is not our place, it should not be our place to wage war on these people. We should be building on what they gave us. And this is the great task, you know. I often say that if you look at the main quadrangle in Columbia University, it's surrounded by statues of the greats. I think Dante, Aristotle, and so on. Why are they up there? They're up there because we are meant to revere and admire them. Unfortunately, a generation or two has been taught that their job as undergraduates, as freshmen and so on, is to judge these giants. And this is a profound mistake. We must re-educate modern men and women in the West to realize we study history, we look at our history, we don't whitewash anything, but we have the greatest of stories to tell and the greatest of heroes to revere. Our job should not, therefore, be, as the neo-Marxists and others wish it to be, to tear down the great men and women of the past. It should be to build on them. It should not be to destroy our history, but to make history.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with your answer. At UF, at the Hamilton School, that is exactly what I have been studying, and it's so valuable. And I think many people my age have never even looked at Aristotle or Plato, which is a huge issue.
Well, they have a great, rich place to go in their lives.
100%. So I want to talk about your work for a second. I think one of the strongest themes running through your work is the virtue of courage in the face of immense social pressure. I mean, we see people of power, such as academics, artists, and leaders, who we know disagree with the prevailing narrative, yet continue to remain completely silent. In your view, what is the cause of this modern cowardice? And I guess on a more personal note, what gives you the strength to speak out when it can be so professionally and personally costly?
Well, you know, I suppose this is a message particularly for young people present, but you basically have, as I see it, two choices in your life when it comes to your attitude towards the truth. You have the opportunity to say the truth as you see it, to be honest about what you see with your eyes, to be honest about what is before you, to be honest in your personal relationships, to be truth-oriented. Now, the interesting thing about that is that you don't necessarily know where you're going. You make the path as you tread it. The other option is that you repeat the mantras and slogans that you've been handed. Now, that way, you're repeating slogans and so on, and there's an advantage to that, which is you do know where you might go. You might get tenure, you might end up working for some community activist organization or something, and you might be able to get into the teaching unions or something, and you could see this. The thing about it is that if you take that second route, it isn't actually your life. It's not your life. You're living a copy of a copy of a copy of someone else's idea of what you should do with your life. And in the end, I suppose you just haven't lived the life that God gave you that you could have lived. That's a tragedy. If you take the first route, wherever it leads you, at least it's your life. It's yours, it's no one else's, not a copy. And I'd add one other thing to that. If you tell the truth as you see it, you will make, as I've discovered in my life, terrific enemies. And I'm very proud of some of mine. But you know what's more important? You will make the best friends. You will have the best of friends. And that is a much greater reward and a much better thing to head for. And I just would add one other thing to that, okay, which is courage. I've learned something, if I may say so, that's been quite useful to me in recent years. Cowardice is catching. Cowardice, you mentioned the people who know something to be true, they won't speak up. Or they say, I'll speak up once I've got to this position. Or I'll speak up once I've got this amount of money to cushion me. Or I'll speak up to, you won't. The day will never come. You'll never have that security. You'll never have that money. It will not appear. So the cowardice is catching. But one of the great things I've learned in recent years, particularly in the last 2 years of war, is that courage is catching too. And wherever you see it, it's catching. And good people want to be near it. Good people want to be close to courage, and they should be close to courage, and they're right to be close to courage. And again, if you look in the long span, whatever the numbers now, whatever the yapping now, in the long term, cowardly people who do not know what they're talking about cannot win against courageous people with a good faith and a good thing to fight for. They can't win.
That is such an admirable and inspiring answer, but I have to take a moment before we close to talk about you personally. I mean, you're an inspiration for this entire crowd. I can tell you that you're an inspiration to my friends and my generation at large. I think I speak for the room when I say that you're a fighter for the truth, for the West, and for so much more. For all of us who are deeply invested in the future of Israel and Western values, Where do you see the most crucial leverage point for turning the tides? And I'm about to go back to my campus at college. What advice can you give to my friends, to my generation, and the people in this room? What can we be doing right now?
Well, let me just take a moment to reflect on something. If we had been speaking here 2 years ago, it would be very different. And if we'd been speaking here 1 year ago, it would be very different. But let's just take a moment before I try to answer that, to say, I said at the beginning where Israel is militarily, where the security of the region has changed. I would also just like to say, if we'd have met 2 years ago, and we knew that more than 250 hostages had been taken into Gaza, and if you had told me where we would be now, I would think that was evidence enough that miracles still happen in the modern era. And that the hostages were brought home, that the energy and the passion and the love of the Israeli public and of publics around the world kept up pressure that meant that so many, not all sadly, but that so many were able to come home. This is an extraordinary thing, and one of the most wonderful things in my life. What we can do now, I would say several things. One is, I beg people not to return to the position that Israel and supporters of Israel were in before the 7th of October. A friend of mine said a couple of months into the war, a friend of mine in Tel Aviv said, Hamas were idiots. If they'd have waited another year, we would have all killed each other. But just think of the state of Israeli society in the year before the 7th, the fights over judicial reform and so on. There is something in hindsight, I say this with great care, but something almost biblical, that the Jewish nation was tearing itself apart and then was reminded of the insanity of doing that. There have been so many times throughout history when similar things have happened. And I really hope that we all are able to keep in mind, particularly the people of Israel, to keep in mind what has been achieved and what is truly important, and not to war on each other, and not to pull, if I may say so, ourselves apart, and to remain focused, and to remember that there are external threats which should sharpen the mind. Secondly, I would say there's something which is extraordinary that has happened in the last 2 years, which has struck me, and I don't know, Phoebe, if you've noticed this among your contemporaries as well, but so many people I've met, Jewish and non-Jewish, have, in the last 2 years since the 7th, have often inadvertently used the opportunity to connect more deeply with their faith and their tradition. This is a profoundly important thing. I know we're over time, but I just read Eli Sharabi's magnificent memoir. And I read it in one go. And there's a story in there, which those of you who read it will know, that in the tunnels underneath Gaza, Eli and the person he's been imprisoned with are put in the same tunnel as 3 young people who'd been kidnapped from the Nova Party. And they exchange stories because there's so little information. And after some time of this, one of the young men of the 3 says to one of the others, he says, "Tell them the sentence. Tell them the sentence. And this young man, 22, when he was kidnapped, says to Eli Sharabi and the other man he's with, he says, "He who has any why can bear any how." Now that Sharabi's memoir is so well written that it doesn't need to be explicated, but that, as many of you will know, is a line from Viktor Frankl's great masterpiece of the Second World War, Man's Search for Meaning. Here's something very, very powerful we should keep in mind. Just think that this one sentence that this young man had heard at some point in his upbringing was something he could pass on hundreds of meters under Gaza to other Jews, and it would help keep them going. If you have a well-furnished, well-stocked mind, and you've been brought up well in your faith, you can survive anything, and you can help others to survive too. This is one of the most important justifications for everybody to re-engage with our tradition, our faith, and much more. And so that, I suppose, is the positive from it. I really hope, that you and your generation do not feel that you have to go to university and be warriors. Because you know what? You should be using your university days to make friends, to sometimes go out to bars, maybe to study, that would be good. But you should be using the years, which are so magnificent to be gifted between childhood and adulthood. You should be using them to flourish, not to feel like you're beleaguered or having to wade through hateful people. So if you do have to be warriors part-time, be happy warriors. And remember that is not the purpose of your days. I'm very fond of a poem by my fellow countryman W.H. Auden, who in 1939, on the outbreak of war, wrote a poem called September the 1st, 1939. He was sitting in a bar on 52nd Street in New York, and he reflects on the degraded, he says, the low, dishonest decade that he's just lived through. But even then, looking out at the world, he says, everywhere, ironic points of light shine out, wherever the just convene. And looking at the evil, he says, may I, composed like them of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. I think our job should be to show an affirming flame and encourage the world and the good and just people all around the world to gather around that flame and to encourage it and to nurture it for millennia to come.
I couldn't agree more. This has been such an incredible conversation. Unfortunately, I think that we're out of time, but on behalf of everyone in this room, we are forever grateful for your voice and your support, and we are wishing you only more and more success.
Thank you. Thank you so much.